for, again, a very impromptu but very well appreciated live stream where we're going to go over Daytona. I don't know who's going to be showing up or whatever. But as usual, I don't really care because I'm doing this for my own benefit. And people that have questions, feel free to chime in. Honestly, I'm going to ask a bunch myself just to again remind everybody. I shouldn't have to keep reminding everybody, but I have Brandon on here, and Brandon Cruz is one of the top, at least my opinion. What the hell do I know? One of the top NASCAR DFS analysts out there, and really just humble guy, smart guy, and those two things don't go hand in hand all too often. And he offers, to come on from time to time, and as I've discussed with him a lot, and as I talk about a lot, whenever somebody has an area of expertise like that, which is so focused, I always think that they should get paid more for what they do than they usually do. But the problem is, as we talked about this business-wise, that Brandon, he does NASCAR. NASCAR is not exactly the most lucrative, DFS sport in general. So, and you have all these other sites that offer NASCAR as part of like 100 other sports. So people like him just kind of get lost in the shuffle a little bit, but that's why I do like to support him somewhat. So he does have a Patreon, which I certainly encourage everybody to support. I certainly encourage you guys to watch his YouTube videos for free, and a good amount of what I do is based on his videos also. And he also puts out projections for his premium members, which I am, by the way, I am my own paying premium member of his Patreon. And he's one of the projection sources that I use when I do my projection models of myself. So we're just going to have some fun. We're going to talk about Daytona today. But again, as I was talking to Brandon just before we got on here, it's not my favorite NASCAR. NASCAR for me is it's the weekly like mile tracks where you figure out who's going to get the lead, and you figure out whatever. But you know what? It's for $1 million, so may as well take a shot. And what we're going to do is, he's probably been talking his ears off about these drivers and like whatever forever, and we'll talk about some of that. But people always ask about, say, Sheets. Why don't you go through your process? So we're going to go through that, and I'm going to kind of ask some questions of Brandon kind of along the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to win the $1 million, and I'll tell you this, like Brandon, he doesn't even realize it. Brandon is getting a 10% free roll of my MME action today. He doesn't realize that yet. But so if we cash for $1 million, he's getting 100,000 out of this. So we're gonna. And the other thing, what we're going to do on a regular basis, I just decided this like 20 minutes ago. What we're going to do every week is we're going to do a subscriber only NASCAR contest, and the winner is going to be given by me a free month of Brandon's Patreon. Okay,
dude, Sheets, that's awesome. You didn't have to do that.
We're going to try to support it, but the problem is you guys have to beat me in the contest. Okay, so I don't want to hear that you get second to me, and then you'll get nothing. All right, so that's the other thing. So I do want to support Brandon. I do want to support NASCAR. I do want to support all of this. So let's just get started. And we're going to talk about process here for a second. So somebody asked kind of what I do. So I'm going to just do this. I'm going to pull up my screen, and right here, this is the DraftKings lineup, but I want to start with what I start with, and that is the projections. Okay, and when I'm building lineups, I have to start with something. And what I do, as you guys know, is I access the projections from a lot of different places, including Brandon, and I upload them into SaberSim, which is the whatchamacallit, is the optimizer that I like to use. Because what it does is it gives you, does a little ownership fade. It kind of like scrambles things around a little bit, kind of randomizes things a little bit. The one thing I will say, by the way, for those of you that this is like kind of some inside information, for those of you that kind of follow my sheets, believe it or not, Brandon's projections actually get more of a weight than the other places I use. And not because of accuracy necessarily, but what happens is that Brandon, more than almost any other place or provider, actually kind of takes stands a little bit. You know what I mean? Like if he likes a guy, he'll have a big projection on him that'll be almost an outlier from like others. And if he doesn't like a guy, he'll have like a 0 on some dude. You know what I mean? And so what happens is if you're subscribing to me and you're getting my sheet, you're actually getting a little more Brandon than other people, than other sources, just so that you guys know. So I put everything in here. And the first thing that I would mention, especially, well, for NASCAR and for Daytona, is it is, believe it or not, NASCAR is a pretty projection-based sport. In other words, when these guys like Brandon, they talk about all the drivers and they talk about, the data and all that stuff. All of that is just kind of like background, which brings them to a projection, right? Like if they think, well, XYZ is going to be, their car looks really good. They have this. And as a result, they're going to be probably near the front. That goes into their projections, So when you start with the projections, you're getting all of the backstory. Okay. So what we do is we start with this, and I think Cam or whatever is saying, show me your process. So this is what I do in general. The first thing I'll do is I'll just upload everything in here, which is my projections, which is means kind of a summary of the industry and my ownership. And then I'll just kind of run, like for openers, just a regular build. And let's just build 150 max. Okay. And we're going to get to you in a JJ in a second, your question. And then I'm going to start with this. Now with some sports, you can really just do this and make a couple of tiny little tweaks and have kind of passable lineups, okay? But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk to Brandon about things that are on my mind, specifically to this race, that will make us kind of change. Oh, I thought I have. Oh, I'm sorry. Good job, Clay. I forgot.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything because I don't know if you wanted that on screen or not.
So I am sharing my screen. I hope you guys can see it. And this is after I did 150 lineup builds, okay, with the projections I had. And this is the initial what I get with it before making any changes. And that would be something like Kyle Busch 100%, and then all this other stuff. Okay, so this is where I always start with every sport. Now what happens after this is really what separates the art from the science and the men from the boys and the this, that, and the other thing. Okay. So the first thing I want to ask, okay, specific to Daytona, specific to this type of race, I want to ask you about variance. All right. With respect to this, what percent ownership, can you really put on a guy? Like if you're playing like 50 lineups, for example, like, is there just way too much? Like if there was like a regular race where it was Kyle Larson had the pole and it was like, and it was like a half-mile track or something like that, and he was and all this stuff, and you knew he was going to lead every freaking lap or whatever it is, you could just probably lock him in and just be kind of done with it, or the opposite. If like he looked really good and he was like number 36, and you know what I mean, like you just lock him in. But with all the wrecks and all the stuff and all the stuff that goes on with Daytona, how much variance is there in this race, and what, in your opinion, would be the most you would have exposure to? Let's say you were building 50 lineups.
So, well, one, I'm glad that we're talking about this, because this is one thing that I'm trying to do more of this year, by like recording myself actually building lines, regardless if people want to watch those videos or not, to try and explain my process to this. And I'll very much explain it here for the plate races. And kind of like we've said, like these are completely different animals compared to the normal week in, week out races, to where you can very easily see who's like not going to work, who isn't going to work here. I know you said 50 lineups. I want to bring it down to like using like a 3 max entry example here, and then I'll expand to a higher amount of lineups. So one thing for me on plate races, being anywhere from 50 to 60 to even 65% on somebody isn't insane. And so if you're, for example, if you're running like a 3 max entry or whatever, and you have a guy in 2 lineups, that's 66%. I don't think that's insane. I understand it's 3 lineups, but that percentage isn't crazy. Whereas if you move that to, let's say, 20, 66 is somewhere, right around like 12, 13 lines or something. Like, I don't think that's insane at all, because you can have enough, low owned and different plays in that to make, even if that individual driver ends up being the highest owned driver on the slate, and you have 66% of him or whatever around that percentage, you can still have lineups that have very low total ownership between the rest of the drivers. And I don't think that's I don't think being high owned on a guy at a plate race is bad, regardless of what his ownership is. If you have a feeling, like if you have a gut feeling that you believe that he's going to be optimal, let's use Kyle Busch for an example today.
Mhm.
I think Kyle Busch is probably going to come in around 60% owned on the field today. If you want to go lower on him, you have to absolutely understand entering that slate that I'm going to be low owned on him. And if he works out, I'm either going to score well on the few lineups that I have with him because they're so different, or if he works out and I have a low percentage of him, I have a chance that those lineups won't even cash. So you need to understand what your stance or take is going to be before you even start building lineups. Um, I don't know if hopefully that's making sense, or hopefully that's kind of like touching
Yeah,
on it.
let me push you one more thing. So you don't think so? I'm not. I don't want to. I don't want to tell you the answer because I don't know it. So you don't think there's very little difference, I guess, between the way you would look at a Daytona race and a plate race, for example, or a regular race with respect to ownership.
Yeah, like if you're making choices based on ownership, it's because you've entered the week understanding like that you either want to like completely avoid high owned guys, or like embrace playing high owned guys with, in addition to like playing low owned guys. I don't Hopefully that's making sense. I'll be able to answer that more and more as we go along. Like Kyle Busch Day, he's at 60%. If you want to be with the field, just make sure that your 60% of lineups have somebody that's low owned, regardless of how ugly they are, like Connor Daly, like BJ McLeod, regardless of the other four drivers in that lineup, make sure that at least one guy in there is like some ugly play that at least makes that lineup different. If like I don't think necessarily like being with the field at Kyle Busch is a bad thing unless you're playing like complete like chalk lineups with him. That is the one area that I would avoid. Like if you're gonna be 60% Kyle Busch today, do not play lineups that are going to project very similar. Like, for example, this Stenhouse, Johnson, Hamlin, Chase Briscoe, Kyle Busch, Austin Dillon line right there. I think that is a lineup that most optimizers are going to put together, just like
Mm-hmm.
SaberSim, Fantasy Cruncher, whatever you're using. That is going to be a high projected lineup that if people are just pulling the CSV from an optimizer, that lineup will be there. So that would be a Kyle Busch lineup that I wouldn't play if you're choosing to play Kyle Busch. Does that
One
make sense?
Yeah, one thing I would say is that, and for those of you that have been following me for a long time on TrueDFS, I'm a big fan of SaberSim. I will say that SaberSim does not handle NASCAR ownership phase all that well. What SaberSim does a really good job with some of these sports is if you set the sliders the way you want them, it produces some low owned lineups. I mean, they do it in baseball really well, hockey really well, even sometimes basketball, but they do a really, really poor job. I would say poor, but they just have it, whatever, of generating high upside, what you call low owned lineups, unless you really force them in. Like, for example, this is supposed to be, if SaberSim's attempt at a high upside, kind of ownership fading lineup. But you see, I mean, like this is everybody's over 20%, and it's not. You have Kyle Busch, and and then you have Denny Hamlin. I mean, this seems like more of a cashy type lineup. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and all things considered, and I'm not trying to overrun. I just want to jump in before we
Yeah,
move on. Like all things considered, that's a great lineup. Like if everything goes according to what every driver should do on a scale of like them wrecking and performing to like their best, this is a type of lineup that would absolutely be optimal if there was like no wrecks, if variance wasn't in play. Like this would be a great lineup. The fact that going back to variance being so huge at these racetracks, this makes this lineup incredibly dangerous as a player for us because, as I said, you're not going to be the only one that plays them, and it can easily be removed from caching if just one or two of these guys ends up running into issues.
yep. Another thing about that I like to do is especially with the plate races, just to do a kind of a sanity check here. One thing you'll notice with plate racing is that, just very simply, because of how important it is to like be at the back, you know what I mean, and because salaries come out sometimes before the place differentials get baked in or whatever, you'll get guys with really high projections at a really really low salary, and what that ends up doing is it makes lineups with leaving anywhere between, I mean, basically infinite money on the table. Like you get like lineups with like 20,000 left on the table, for example. And like, for example, I'm just literally sorting these guys by nothing other than raw projection, and you see like these 5,500 guys, 4,800 guys, like they're like in the top 10. You know what I mean? You just don't see that in other sports. You know what I mean? It's just because, and specifically to this type of race, you're just going to get that. So for those of you that have not learned this yet, okay, specifically in a race like this, don't worry if when you build lineups, you're getting like a whole bunch of money left on the table. And that's why, like, when people ask me my process in other sports, when they ask me, do you ever like limit your salary or do a minimum salary? I don't set a minimum salary for any sport. Because I just kind of trust the projections, and that if I'm getting a projection based lineup, even in basketball, that leaves 1,200 on the table, I'm just going to roll with it, And the fact is, in basketball, it's kind of hard to have a high projected lineup with 1,200 left on the table, but in some sports you can. And the question that I guess I have with NASCAR is, or with other sports, for example, is, do you want to force yourself to leave money on the table? In other words, like if for whatever reason, like, okay, let's look at this lineup right here. This one is 49,900. Okay. Mm-hmm. Would you, and this is on your experience in playing plate races and in general, would you like set a maximum as far as salary to be used, or you just kind of let it roll?
So I let it roll. I want to jump in, and since we're kind of talking lineups here, I want to just talk about what my highest raw projected lineup is, because like I due to ownership and everything, I'm just not going to play these types of lineup builds. But it's very similar to the first run that SaberSim ran for you. Mine is Austin Dillon, Eric Jones, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, Haley, and Reddick. That's just with all the projections. I mean, that has Ryan Blaney starting 7th, but everybody else in there, like Reddick, Blaney, Hamlin, Jones, Austin Dillon, we're seeing a lot of that on your end as well, of just being high owned drivers. That's why like Daytona is really like 3 different games, and you're from the poker world, so you more than anybody understand how much it is like a player versus player type of approach. Like, what are you going to do differently compared to the guy that you're playing with, regardless of what your cards are? Here you almost have to like steer away from what like the projected lineups are going to be in order to like be different, in order to actually have a higher chance of winning than just running like a whatever the optimal lineup is with whatever optimizer you're using.
Well, let me deal with Adam's question here, because I think Adam knows the answer already to this. He's asking it, but I think he knows the answer. What he's asking is, do you ever do any kind of build for plate races where you literally X out guys from like 1 to 15? And again, that's an arbitrary number, right? 1 to 15, 1 to 18, 1 to 19, 1 to 14, whatever it is. X out pre-builds. Do you ever do that? I'm gonna answer that after you answer it, but I think Adam
knows the answer. So for me with plate races, how I play, I never play the top 15 guys. I have determined that's my arbitrary number. Just happens to be 15 as well, but I will not play anybody up there. And so like for me, I want to say like this weekend has been brutal. Like I haven't made any money between the truck and Xfinity Series weekend just by how the races are going out, but I still use the same process for that, to where I want to cut out the starting positions up front and chase guys that have a high upside in terms of a race that ends up having a lot of crashes and a lot of DNFs. This weekend has been a true outlier. If you look at how the races have played out, like the truck race on Friday, that's the first race in almost 10 years that more than 60% of the field actually finished the race. Now, granted, it ended under rain, but in my opinion, this weekend we've seen a lot of outliers so far. So of course, I'm not going to make money in those situations and stuff. But I always X out the first 15 starters on any plate race, and that's Daytona and Talladega. I'm still debating on what I want to do specifically for Atlanta. I'd like to have more races to look at and just more data to make stances. But for Daytona Talladega, I always X out the top 15 drivers.
Okay, so I think Adam already knows the answer to this, and the answer to this is absolutely not. I would not X them out, and the reason why is because of what I just said. I mean, if you've done your work, then these guys in the top 1 to 15 are just going to project like shit anyway, and so there's no need to X them out. Just run it as usual. And by definition, the guys from 1 to 15 are just not going to be there, or if they are there, they're there as a little bit of, it's a little bit of ownership pivot or something like that. So I would never, and I almost never ever X out anybody in anything in any sport ever. Okay. For that exact reason. Now, what I will do, if in some sports, if I feel as though I like have some kind of knowledge or something like that, I'll X out players after the build just because, like, let's say I just don't want to play Peyton Pritchard, just as an example, or I just don't want to play some guy. This guy just sucks. And that's like an analytical term, right? Guy sucks.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I don't care what he projects. Then I'll X him out. Okay. But if we're going to presume that the people that make projections do all the drill down work and say, okay, guy is from the pole at Daytona. He's got no floor, and he's going to project for like an 11. I don't need to X him out because he's just going to not show up anyway. So that's my answer, is that I would not do that.
I think for me, I see a difference in terms of projections and in terms of building lineups. So like, as I said, for me, like when I personally build lineups, I X 15 on forward out. However, like when I run projections and stuff, I leave everybody in. Like, for example, the lineups that I gave with Ryan Blaney, he's starting 7 today because I want to understand where lineups are going to go if the entire pool is there. So at least for me, I'm kind of lashing on to, like, you can remove people like once you're messing around with builds, once you want to see where things are. But I at least for me, I leave everybody in when I run my projections, and at least the first like 2 runs, I just want to see where everybody's coming in at and what type of lineups are being built.
So one thing I'll do in my again, I'm not saying this is right, but in my process is one thing that I'll do like post build is this. So this is the raw projection sheet that I put up on True DFS or whatever it is. It says all this stuff and the salary and the fantasy points, point per dollar, and my value score. And what I will do, for better or for worse, is I will look at this, and I'm rating these by value score, and I will just find some guys here that project for low ownership. That would be I'm just looking at either Riley Herbst, like Cody Ware, maybe BJ McLeod, or whatever it is, and just take guys like that and just manually upgrade them as far as percentage goes. Just to give myself some ownership juice in some of these. So like we'll use Cody Ware, like for an example. What do I have of him like right now in this build? I have 0. Okay. So just for fun, like I like to say, I'll put say 30% of like Cody Ware, and Saberson doesn't even like that. They're like, oh my God, how are you doing this? It's actually making me like literally like rebuild because it hates it so much, but I don't care, So I will go ahead and so that's one thing I will do, especially with like when I'm getting like you said, like a whole portfolio of chalk, what I'll do is I'll say, you know what, I'll go back to my raw sheets, see who projects low, ownership wise, and just manually just say, you know what, I'm taking 30 of you, or 20 of you, or something like that. And what that'll do, listen, it'll screw with the optimizer, but you know what? That's cool. I think it's cool to screw with the optimizer a little bit,
So
Um,
I have a question for you, and this will go back. We'll talk about optimizers a lot because
yeah,
I don't have as much experience with you. Do you like we'll use NASCAR for example? Do you run an optimizer and then, regardless of whatever run it is, do you just pull those lineups in and put them in a DraftKings, or do you still manually make lineups
yeah.
during the day?
Well, both. So what happens is if I'm playing like if I'm playing 20 lineups, like only 20 lineups, I'll pull it in the DraftKings and then I'll screw with it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And then I'll screw with it. But what I find with here is that you can screw with it within the optimizer beforehand. You know what I mean? So you don't
Mhm.
really need to. But the answer to your question is the lower amount of lineups you have, the more you can manage by hand.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
so
So
like,
the reason I wanted to ask is because these races specifically, in my opinion, show and illustrate the shortcomings of optimizers. Now, clearly, you're going around it because, like the Cody Ware example that you just made, they're like going in, forcing it to get in the lines and stuff. I don't believe that people do that enough. I really do believe that people might do one, two, maybe three runs with builds and whatever site they're using, and then they'll just pull those lineups to where is like unless you're specifically going in and making it like you did with Cody Ware there, uh, I don't think people are doing that enough. And when we look at where how lineups are, especially with mass multi entry players, we don't see them have enough, in my opinion, enough like over ownership on like super low owned plays, like Cody Ware being 3%. I think that's what most builds, if you run 150 lineups, would have him at, to where I think you should specifically in these races have him be way higher than that compared to the field. And most optimizers won't do that unless you're tinkering with it right here, or you're specifically making it run
that's
somebody by like bumping up their projections. I just want to point that out. I don't think
I'll
enough
tell you
people
I'll
do
tell you
that.
something else which is really cool about this specific optimizer. So what Saberson will do, it provides. So I built say 60 lineups here, but what it really did is it built a pool of 500.
Mhm.
And what it did is it takes the top 60. So then what happens is let's say that I want to make a little change. Let's say I want to, instead of getting 1% Ross Chastain, let's just say I want to give 10. I could put 10 in here and not have to rerun it. Like it'll automatically like give me the next bunch of lineups. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
To give
Mm.
me 10, and that's a really good feature. Otherwise you have to just
Yeah.
keep on tweaking, keep on rerunning or something like that. Um, and likewise, let's say I wanted to put max ownership of, just for example, like 80% of Kyle Busch. It'll automatically like put these new lineups in. So then I
Mhm.
can just go ahead and just upload that way. Um, the other thing I would like to mention is this, and this is should go without saying, but maybe it shouldn't. So what happens is this with the plate racing, this is my opinion. This is what happens with plate racing, especially for people that have been doing DFS for a little bit. This is what they'll do. They'll say, okay, I know that the right idea is to play guys from the back because of the way the nature of plate racing works. This is what you're supposed to do. There's no dominator points, and to be had really. And when a wreck happens, it's just a shit show, right? So you just get that, and you can win with zero in some of your guys, whatever it is. So and then what happens is people just get way too cute, and they'll say, I know I'm not supposed to play this guy in the top 10, but I want to get a little different. So maybe I'll play this guy, or maybe I'll play that guy. And first of all, I think that's a mistake. I think if you get to it, you get to it. But I think that's a mistake. But the real error people make is this, and even people in your industry do this. They'll go and they'll look at past optimals, and they'll say, okay, in the last past optimal, we had two guys from the top 20, all right? Or in the last optimal, we had one guy from the top 10. And what people will do is say, okay, then I'll make sure to have one guy from the top 10. It That's not the way it works. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like just because it happened to have had one from the top 10, two from the top 20, it doesn't mean you should build that way. I could make the argument that even if the last 10 races, which is a small sample size anyway, had two from the top 10 and two from the top 20, I could still argue that I'm supposed to play everybody from 25 and behind. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah. So one. I think it's different today with the amount of entries in the main 25. I believe that the optimal lineup will be played today. However, when we get to smaller content like 50,000, 40,000, 30,000 people, some of the times the optimal lineup isn't even played between all the players building lineups because it might be so random, or it might be like one random guy starting eighth and then the one guy in the top 10 or whatever. I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they try and chase building an optimal lineup for this race based on previous races. I know I kind of just repeated what you said there, but I do want to reiterate that I think that is a mistake that people make. Like in terms of what's optimal today, I don't think is going to necessarily be exactly what was optimal, last Daytona 500 or the Daytona 500 before. I also want to add that I think this is a really, really hard slate to win just due to the amount of people that have the potential of being optimal that are just in good cars, like not even getting incredibly wild with, you know, like it, for example, like that Kyle Busch, Stenhouse, Johnson, Hamlin, Chase Briscoe, Austin Dillon line that's on your screen right there. Like that would not shock me if that actually ends up being optimal just due to the fact that those are like good drivers in the back that should survive up until late in the race. I want to segue that to I think we're going to see when we look back at ownership between, let's say, the back marker slower cars in the back, we've seen it maybe have slight increases uh, due to them like being optimal in the uh, summer Daytona race last year and scoring well in certain races. Like we've seen maybe increases by like 0.1 or 2% over the last like two or 3 years and stuff. Even with people saying like stack from the back, play guys from the back. But in a race like this, to where we have, I'm gonna highlight BJ, Connor Daly, Cody Ware, Riley Herbst. These four drivers are absolutely surrounded by outstanding like drivers and outstanding equipment. I think we're going to see these guys carry ownership that's way lower compared to what they should be at. So like for example, Riley Herbst, I currently see just in this run, I think it was 11.2 ownership in those runs there. Uh, a driver who I think runs similar to him, David Reagan, a name that is more familiar, we have more data around, that would end up pushing that car's ownership to around maybe 20. But because it's Riley Herbst, he's at 11. Whereas like Cody Ware, we saw that the first run with your stuff had him around like 3 or 4% ownership. I don't believe that he's going to be anywhere over like 7 or even 6% ownership. Um, Same thing with like BJ McLeod. Like I think due to the people surrounding these drivers this weekend, we might see these drivers come in way lower than what they even normally come in at, just because people don't want to play them. They see people projected, whether it's a baseline projection, whether it's ceiling and floor, like Stenhouse and Ty Gibbs, Chase Briscoe are blowing BJ, Connor Daly, Cody Ware out of the water in terms of projections, in terms of what optimizers want to do. And I think it'll turn into a situation where, as I was kind of saying with Kyle Busch, if you're playing Kyle Busch, you're going to want some low owned guy. And so McLeod, Daly, Ware, Herbst might end up defaulting to just that last guy in a lineup versus being played together. And I think we're going to see them all in like mid single digit, if not lower ownerships in this race.
And this is you, what's his name asking me about process. Like this is legit what I do, and this is what I do when it's not my sport. And I don't consider the NBA my sport. So when I build my lineups, and then you guys see me like 6 o'clock when I'm doing like my live stream with Bobby and stuff like that. When Bobby puts like kind of a take out there, whatever, I'm literally just manually upping my ownership based on what he says. In other words, like if I had like 2% of a guy and he says, "Oh, I think this is probably a good low owned play," I'll just literally, and remember, I started with this like this is regular builds, right? And then as somebody comes up, like for example, like just in our conversation, I've now put in 30% Cody Ware, 30% uh, Riley Herbst, and 20% Connor Daly. Will I actually go with this? I don't know. Maybe not. But this is like something you could do, especially with SaberSim that builds all these lineups for you, and then you put your own kind of take in here, and then it could just then you automatically now you're getting some low owned stuff. Now you're not getting these first couple, but you're gonna because they're not gonna project quite as well, but you're gonna get there, and I still have like 20. Again, listen, Who's got 30% herps, 30% wear, and 20% daily? You in the same build? I don't know. We're gonna find out.
Yeah, and like with those, if you go through, like I don't think, can you scroll on the right to like, let's go to the first lineup that has one of those three
You
individual
can even
drivers.
do better than that. So check this out. So let's go with here now. We have all the Cody Ware lineups. Okay.
Mhm.
And then what we could do also is you could see how many have both Cody Ware and Herbst, for example.
Mhm.
Right. So they're where is Riley Herbst? I think we should be able to do that. Well, I see him right there actually. So there's a Riley Herbst, there's a Riley Herbst. So basically all of them. Like almost all. And who's got this? Who's got Cody Ware, Daly, and Herbst leaving 8,000 on the table? You know what I mean?
With three chalk plays that
Right.
like have high ceilings. Like this,
Right.
this is what I mean. At least when I talk about in shows or videos as well. Like you can play quote unquote bad drivers with good drivers and have lineups that aren't going to be duplicated nearly as much. And you don't have to get that crazy. Like I'm not saying in every like put all your money on like 6 terrible plays, but looking at these lineups, like these aren't bad lineups that we're showing on the screen right now.
Right. Let me ask you this. So really, I guess say sort of advanced. So one of the reasons I got into DFS, which is interesting to me, is the way different sports correlate, and some correlate quite a bit, some correlate none at all. Like baseball and hockey and League of Legends, just straight up full on correlation. Like MMA, like straight on, like no correlation. Tennis, no correlation. Golf, you can talk about wind or whatever it is. But NASCAR, I want to ask you about it for the purposes of this race. So it seems as though part of the key in this particular race is to stay out of trouble. Okay. And talk to me a little bit about this. And this is might not be within projections. This is like extra added knowledge that people like Brandon might have. Is I hear some stuff about like XYZ is really good at working with XYZ, you know, or AJ Almadino works really well. I don't even remember the names, right? Or teams. Are there certain teams that are more inclined to? They're very happy to come in like 15th, 18th, and 20th in this thing. You know what I mean? So they'll just kind of just say, just stay out of the way. Why don't you tell me a little bit about some pairings of guys like that, or some teams like guys like that? And it's probably a good idea to play those guys together, right? I mean, if they're if you have three guys that are deliberately going to stay out of each other's way, or even help each other in some way, maybe you can get three guys from the same team to stay out of a wreck. I mean, then maybe you're getting some benefit that way.
Yeah, and especially in a situation like you where you have a portfolio of a lot of lineups, I think correlating either manufacturers, the teams that these individual drivers are with, makes a lot of sense. I think if you're more of like a 20 max player, you might want to allocate maybe 25% of your total lines like team stack or manufacturer stacks like that in a race like this, to where, as I said, the volatility of who can be involved in a wreck is so high. There are chances to where if you have a 4-car team, one car, like they might run together all day, and one car will be involved in a wreck at the end of the race, and 3 of the other guys will finish up front. And so you you can, like, I think that's why I said, like, I would only allocate a certain amount of your lineups to doing that, because there's still a chance that you might be shooting yourself in the foot and going so much on a certain team or a certain manufacturer that you then walk into a situation where you walk into somebody not finishing a race because you specifically targeted a group of people who are going to work together, and not all of them are going to make it through like a certain wreck or a certain situation. Or if they pit together, like we're going to see today, we're going to see manufacturers decide to pit together. Well, if you play all Fords and you have 1 or 2 guys end up speeding on pit lane because they all pit together and somebody made a mistake and so on and so forth, you might accidentally just walk into a situation where you're handicapping yourself by chasing that way. If you go, 100%, or if you make that like a focal point of your lineups, I think that's a very delicate area of lineups that I try and as I said, for me personally, I'll allocate maybe 25% lineups focusing on a manufacturer stack, a team stack. But for me, I've just always kind of ran into issues to where when I look back at lines and races, and I'm like, man, if I didn't just build this lineup chasing this one team, it probably would have done better because what's the likelihood of all four drivers performing well? Like we're probably going to have one dud in that. I mean, I guess it's the same thing with like NFL. If you stack a quarterback, two wide receivers, and a tight end, you're most likely going to have one of those three uh, receiver players, not score as well. Sure, you're landing on, you know, a team stack, but still, it's very difficult for all three of those guys to perform well in a game. It's usually correlated to two guys.
So one thing you could do with SaberSim is you could build that traditional group stuff. So like let's give me an example of like what's RHR? Is that RHR? Is that the one that
Stewart Haas Racing? So that would be Kevin Harvick.
so hold on. Let's see. So so what you could do is you put like Harvick, who else?
Ryan Preece.
Let's see, let me find him. Preece. Okay.
Eric Almirola.
Again, I'm not as okay.
Okay. And Chase Briscoe.
Okay. Where would he be? Oh, here. So what you could do, right? Like for a couple of lineups, if you want, we could play at least 3 of these. I mean, if you want to get really cool, like you said, you could play all 4, but you could do some with at least 3. We'll save this rule. Actually, just for fun, we'll do all 4. So we'll save this rule, and then what we'll do is we'll just build. I'll just build a couple. You know what I mean? Like I'll build like 5 or something like that. You know what I mean? Or something. 5 of my 50. I'll do with this. And that is again. Something you could do. I don't do that much of it because I've tried to ask you and other NASCAR people like 30,000 different ways the same question. I can't get anybody to sign off on the idea that you should really be just like putting all these teams together. I just look at these like they have these freaking machines that they want to help each other so much, but I guess it's just not as important as I think it is. You know what I mean? To have all these. To have all these guys in the same lineups.
I think it's more important for real life implications, but I don't think it's a 1-to-1 representation for DFS.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let me ask you another question. Do you ever play on FanDuel?
I do here and there. I don't. It really just depends on what. It really depends on the weekend if I feel like it or not. I think FanDuel has an inferior DFS product, and I feel like it's just getting forgotten and stuff. So I'll play on FanDuel maybe twice a month, and I typically like playing less of like the plate tracks and more of tracks where I just regular weeks. That's normally when I play on FanDuel more.
Okay. Well, because the reason why FanDuel stinks is because they have five slots. It's like almost impossible to get anything other than mass dupes. But I'll tell you though that there's nothing wrong with chopping with like 10 or 12, 15 people. You know what I mean? Like sometimes. And I've actually and like you said, as more people start hating and less people will play there, which makes it a little better. You did a lot of the team correlation with the duels, Adam. Okay. So let me just, I guess, I mean, because I have to run a little bit too. I promised I wouldn't do this, so I'm not going to do this. But okay, why don't you give us one guy for today that we haven't talked, maybe that we have talked about. How about just one guy you guys, I don't know, you have a feeling about, that you think not many people like that you want to throw in today? Just anything.
I think and this won't be a necessarily bad play. If you look back at his history at these races, Ty Dillon makes a lot of sense. And I believe that he is going to come in lower owned compared to what he should due to the names. surrounding him. So if we look back at Ty Dillon real quick, let me bring my stuff up over here, which if you have the Patreon, you can see how many times they've been optimal, and we have finishing positions all the way back to 2015. So if you look at Ty Dillon, this man he's been optimal 3 times at these races, but he almost always finishes inside the top 17. Like, he rarely DNFs. The only times I'm going to look at Atlanta, Talladega, and Daytona just to emphasize how rarely this man wrecks. He's ran nearly every race at these racetracks since, just make sure. Yeah, since 2016. He has wrecked in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's only wrecked 8 times since really 2015. And he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 finishes inside the top 16. And normally we have seen his ownership push right around like 30, 28% on a normal slate like this at a plate race. But the fact that he's surrounded by so many good cars, I think that he isn't going to carry as much ownership that I think he should. And so for me, I know for a fact I'm going to play Ty Dillon in my lineup today. And I think, like, sure, he looks great on paper, even when you're looking at sheets, but I still think just by how people are going to build in general, I still think he comes in lower owned compared to what he should be at.
All right, so I am going to take you up on this, Brandon, and hopefully get you on here more often, especially when the real races start. And listen, we're gonna have like all this money to spend after we win the million today. So whatever. So I do encourage everybody to join the Patreon, and we'll get that piece done. And at the very least, watch his free stuff, and you see, by the way, my process. You guys have seen exactly what I did, okay? And you even saw some of the changes I made. The only thing I still have to do is put these five team stack ones in. But aside from that, you guys know exactly what I'm playing. You don't remember exactly what I'm playing, but whatever. And I might make a couple of changes, whatever. That will do it. Good luck, everybody. And any questions, listen, post in the Discord. Every once in a while, Brandon will pop in there and check it out. And you can join his Discord as well. He has his own Discord. If you want to put a link to your Discord and my Discord, that's totally fine too. And that'll do it. Anything else, Brandon, real quick?
No, thank you so much for having me on, Sheets. And I'm looking forward to hopping on and just talking just more, and not necessarily like a picks video, but just kind of talking through processes. Yeah. I really enjoy these types of conversations, probably more than the regular live shows that I do.
Well, the thing is this is what I've been saying when I've been doing my videos on other sports, my YouTube stuff. I'm like, listen, if I'm doing my job right, you should not have to come back each week and see who, who to play. You should be able to, access the tools, like access the projections that are on, say, Patreon or whatever, and be able to work on building your own lineup because you've been learning the process, not like coming back each day. Who does Sheets like today? Who does this? So with any luck, we will have learned, we will have taught somebody something. All right, that'll do it. Good luck, everybody.